Okay, just recalling where we left off last time, the main point that we're making is that history lasts 6,000 years. This is in the Talmud itself. There seems to be a consensus on this particular point. We are now holding in the year 5770, which means there are only 230 years left to go of history. But nevertheless, that still remains to be a long period of time, and the main issue is that, where are we holding today? Are the events of today significant in terms of that they represent the end of a long historical messianic process that goes back to the beginning of Ma'aseh Bereshis, or are they simply just events like other events along the way to get to the final destination, but we're not quite there yet. In other words, how do we know Mashiach's not going to come at the last second, just before the year 6,000, or maybe even 100 years before 6,000? It's still past our lifetime. Maybe there'll be many presidents of the United States of America. A lot of history will happen in the meantime. Maybe, as some people predict or think about or worry about, that there might be even another exile of the Jewish people from the land, God forbid, which is not logical. But some people wonder about that when they see what's going on here in the land and the pressure being put on the Jewish people by the nations of the world today. That's significant. So the point that we left off with last time was that the correlation of Ma'aseh Bereshis to the 6,000 years of history, one day for 1,000 years, that we're now holding the 6th day of Ma'aseh Bereshis correspondingly, and more importantly, that when you actually divide the 1,000 years by 12, corresponding to the actual daylight creating hours that God used to make Ma'aseh Bereshis, looking for the corresponding event, as the Gra points out, that we're actually 20 years into the period of time that corresponds to when Adam HaRishon ate from the 8th Das Tovara. That's significant. That's extremely important, because since the whole point of history is for the sake of tikkun, that there's no greater period of time to do tikkun than the corresponding period of time when Adam ate from the 8th Das Tovara. So Mashiach Nachash, the same gematria, meaning that the snake, he was the catalyst to put us into exile from the Garden of Eden, and all of history for that matter. We're still wandering to this very day. The Mashiach comes to end the process. So it's safe to assume that the period of Mashiach overlaps with the 10th hour, and we're 20 years into that period of time right now, which is a lot of time. And that all that happened since 1990 is all part of this 10th hour reality. In other words, the Persian Gulf War, the falling apart of the Russia, of the Soviet Union, and the ability of millions of Jews to leave Russia after decades of being unable to leave without losing everything. A lot of significant changes between 86, 87, 88, 90, and including the fact that the Jewish lobby in America, the Jewish political lobby has gotten weaker, and the Arab lobby has ascended and become stronger. It's also all part of this 10th hour reality, which we'll have to talk about a little bit more, B'ezras Hashem, and it becomes significant in as much as we can see it ties back to the regional chet of the period of time we're living right now is extremely important. However, even if we are 20 years into the 10th hour of the 6th day of history, and the Shabbos of history is coming closer, still that would leave 63.33 years of the 83.33 year period of time that Mashiach could actually come. And that's a lot of time. That's over 6 decades. Many people who are in their 40s and 50s at this point in time would assume they would not be here for that. And that the events of today, as important as they are, they're not necessarily the final events. That's the issue. Now, so as of 1990, there's no question that we're living an extremely, extremely significant period of history, and the events of today are somehow playing in towards the final act of creation, as we understand it, and as we know it, in preparation for the world to come. But still, there's a lot more can happen before things come to a conclusion, right? So that's really the issue we're dealing with right now. And there's what to be said about that. In fact, it's an extremely, extremely important point that the lesson, in fact, brings down that many people are not aware of. And he's talking about, at this time, Techis HaMesim, which is the resurrection of the dead. Now, the whole point of the resurrection of the dead, as the assumption is going to be, that the person will die, we'll all die at some point in time, but our souls will come back, they'll be judged together with the body. The Gemara in Sanhedrin on Tzadik Tes, Amud Aleph, Amud Beis over here talks about a parable about to do with the resurrection of the dead. And it's a process we have to undergo in order to be able to stand before God on the final day of judgment in preparation for the world to come. But that's going to come a long, long time in the future. You ask the average person, when does the Chis HaMesim take place? It takes place after the year 6000. Long after the year 6000. Maybe even the year 7000, right? It's not relevant to our period of time right now. However, the Leshem explains, and this is extremely important and a novel idea that changes everything. And he makes the point that the whole point of the Chis HaMesim is to rectify the chet of Adam HaRishon, at least the impact of the chet of Adam HaRishon. And what was that impact? The impact was the following thing, that we know as a result of the chet, Adam received clothing. Until that time, they were both, they were both without clothing, and they weren't embarrassed. As Rashi points out, there was no need for sneers because there was no Yetzer Hara at that point in history. So there was a major transformation in the mahus of the first man and the first woman back in that stage of history. Now, what is it? What's the transformation? What's the actual change? So the change takes place like this. Really, before the chet, as the Zohar points out, Adam HaRishon, his skin, his body, his being was kesonas or. Spelled Aleph Vav Resh. Kesonas means like clothing, but or is light. He was wearing clothing of light, and that's why he did not require clothing, physical clothing, and why he did not require, had no Yetzer Hara. There was no issue with snus because everything was made from light. Even though there was form and there was reality, as many people point out, if Adam HaRishon was here today, he'd be so spiritual we wouldn't be able to see him. Even though he was a huge individual, huge being, he's so spiritual beyond our capacity to actually view him. So the transformation as a result of looking at the tree, the Leshem explains, and actually partaking of the tree and interacting with the snake caused a transformation in the being of Adam HaRishon, and he went from being kesonas or with an aleph, clothing made from light, to kesonas or with an ayin vav resh, which means clothing made from skin. The actual clothing that Adam first got was not the physical clothing we wear right now. Rather, the clothing he got was this. This is the clothing. This is not the way Adam was created. Adam was made from light. His being, his body was completely different. As a result of the chet, he became more physical, and the world around him in which he lived became more physical, and everything became more gashmi, more material. So and the problem is, you can't go to the world to come like this. This is too physical. You can't get through the keyhole. We're not going to pass over the threshold to the world to come like this. So the lesson explains that's the whole point of the Chis HaMesim. The whole point of the Chis HaMesim is to transform mankind back from kesonas or with an ayin, made like this mishkid chiv. It's called the clothing of the skin because the skin, the snake was the catalyst to bring it about. They go from kesonas or with an ayin back to kesonas or with an aleph once again. And as the Gemara points out, during the Chis HaMesim, people who were transformed will look like angels, just like Adam would have in the Garden of Eden, as Rashi points out. So that's the point of the Chis HaMesim. So that's the case. When does it take place? So the Leshem says it has to take place before the year 6000. Not after the year 6000, but before the year 6000. And since during the Chis HaMesim everybody is perfect, in fact the Gemara says even Yemot HaMashiach, the Gemara in Sukkah points out, Nun Beis on the Aleph, even Yemot HaMashiach, the Yetzer Hara, the Sitra Achra no longer has a job anymore. He's finished. So therefore, if the world has already become perfect in Yemot HaMashiach, how much more so into Chis HaMesim? There's no need for Mashiach anymore. There's no role for Mashiach. Everybody is in the Madrega of Mashiach at that point in time, the Chis HaMesim, in resurrection of the dead. Which means that the longer, the greater the period to Chis HaMesim, the shorter the period of time the Mashiach can actually come. So we're 10th hour begins in 1990. We're already 20 years into the period of time. There's 63.33 years to go until the end of that 10th hour, right? But the question is, at what point does the Chis HaMesim actually begin? because that will mean that the period of time is either, if it's after 63.33 years from now, so then there's no difference. But if it starts to go into that period of time, take away from that period of time, it means the window through which Mashiach can come gets smaller and smaller and smaller, making the events of today far more significant. So the Leshem starts talking about it over here, and he says the following thing. He says, V'hinei, theoretically speaking, right, that nireh lamar, right, it makes sense to say, the zman ichos shel oisen shimusa kodem b'techiyah lo hiya shava b'kulam el b'kol echad b'fi madrega so. That it makes sense, since the point of Techiyas Meisim is for the sake of resurrecting a person rectified, that part of the rectification process, the actual death that a person undergoes, and then the actual dissolving and rotting the ground is all part of the tikkun process. So that's dependent upon how material you were in this world. So therefore he's saying that it's logical to assume that different people will spend different periods of time in the ground. The more material a person was in this world, the longer they will spend in the ground becoming rectified, because our attachment to the material physical world impacts the very muhus of our being. So therefore, in order to rectify that, we have to go through this decay process after death. And how long you have to spend in the ground depends upon how material you were in this world. It says, therefore, that's the logic of the Avalafi. Nusach acher, right? According to a different nusach, shekasha b'zohar niska become lo miyad, harei mashmash is manech halukulam. But however, he says, based upon another text of the Zohar, it seems that everybody gets up at the same time. Everybody who died, in advance of Techiyas Meisim will all get up at the beginning, right? Amnam nira kishtana b'kol echad zman hamisa v'techiyah, right? So he says what's going on over here, really the truth is, what makes us how to resolve all this is that even though people may spend the same amount of time in the ground, what will be different is when they actually die, and therefore when they actually resurrect. So if the period of time of Techiyas Meisim, let's say, is 100 years, and people are dying at different times, the amount of time they actually spend on the ground and rotting and decaying in preparation for the resurrection, that may be the same for everybody. So he continues, the lesson continues and says the following thing, that everybody's not going to die exactly at the same time, rather, right? So therefore, automatically, people will come back at different times. In other words, it's not that everyone who died and is going to die, they're all going to die at the exact same moment, right before Techiyas Meisim, and no matter how good or how righteous you were, or how material you were, we all come back pitom exactly the same moment. It's not going to work like that. Rather, the period of Techiyas Meisim is going to begin, and some people will come back right away. For example, righteous people who died, let's say, before, will come back immediately, but other people will still be living in their present state, or their alom hazeh state. So it's the practical difference over here means that there'll be people who will be resurrecting at the same time that people will not be resurrecting. So there'll be a mixture of two types of people. Those people who are already back to Kesumas Or with an Aleph, they're already made from light, and those people still walking around with Kesumas Or with an Ayin, still physically the way we are right now. So you can imagine what a phenomenally different world is going to be. You look across the road into your neighbor's window, you'll see they're all, look at that, they're all Kesumas Or, their whole family came back already, they're all resurrected, they're all perfectly, when we finally get a chance to do things like that and be transformed and become more spiritual as a result of that. Today, we long to live and we fear to die. Then, we will yearn to die and fear to live because we'll want to come back already resurrected as soon as possible. That's what he says. He says over here, right? So anybody who's already rectified from his zuhama, the indelible spiritual impurity that Adam Arishon gained from the Eitz Das Tova Ra, the whole interaction with the snake back then, that anybody who's already perfected himself, he's gone through this world, he's done mitzvahs, he's worked upon himself, he's become more spiritual as time goes on, and he dies a pure person, like the Gemara in Shabbos talks about. He gives back his soul to Kodesh Baruch Hu, perfectly pure the same way that he got it. Right? Became filthy from all of his averas. He did tshuva. He rectified everything. He was a tzaddik. Such a person will come back early, right away, to Chiyas HaMesim. He says, the whole point of dying at that time at the Chiyas HaMesim will be for the sake of dissolving the chumras, the physicality haguf of the body itself, in order to be able to recreate the body anew in its original spiritual light form. So he goes on to say, right, the whole point, that the death at that time will be here, right? The whole point of death then is only going to be for the sake of allowing the body to dissolve in the ground, to be recreated anew, the panim chadashus, brand new, like Adam Harishon before the chet, with the sun's or, body made from light. And the period of time, the amount of time, the period of time from the time of death until the time of resurrection, Lukulam Shava will be equal to everybody, for everybody. But the actual time of death will not be the same for everybody. The Kol Hador, and the actual period of time of deaths and resurrections being remade all over again for an entire generation, whose manim harbeh. It's a long period of time, he says. The actual period of time of the Chiyas HaMesim, of the dying of all the different people who will still be alive at that time, to come back at the Chiyas HaMesim will last a considerable period of time. Right? So he says, Zachat tzaddikim asher misu kavar, but tzaddikim, righteous people who have already died in the past, yikumu b'rishona, they'll come back right away first, right? They've already died, they've been buried. Some don't have to even rot because they're so pure. There is something waiting around in their Chiyas HaMesim form already until the right moment came along historically. And those who had to go through any kind of purification process already have gone through it. They'll come back at the beginning, right? When is that going to begin? Immediately after the 40 years of kibbutz galuyos. So what are we talking about over here? Are we talking about after the year 6000? Is there such a thing as kibbutz galuyos after the year 6000 and all of the neshamas? Not at all. Kibbutz galuyos is a function of our history. It's the final phase of the ingathering of the Jewish people back to Eretz Yisrael, as the Torah speaks about, right? So if 40 years of kibbutz galuyos, we're being told right now, based on the Zohar, also in Medrash Ne'elam. So immediately after this 40-year period of time, that's what the Chiyas HaMesim is supposed to begin. So that always indication, as Election's pointing out, that the Chiyas HaMesim belongs to this side of 6,000, to our period of history, right? So the question becomes, how long will it actually last? That's the issue. Because the Chiyas HaMesim is not relevant to Mashiach, it's after Yemot HaMashiach. And therefore, the length of time will indicate how small Yemot HaMashiach is actually going to be, because it's between whatever time began, our period of history, and then. So he says, right, V'zeh she'amru b'medrash Ne'elam. This is what it says in the Medrash Ne'elam. Parshas told us, Kuf Mem, Amud Aleph, 140a, Shiyu Harbeh Techiyus. There'll be a lot of Techiyus, says the Zohar, right? V'yum Shach. Zman kol Techiyus, right? And the entire period of time at Chiyas HaMesim, Ladas Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Yehuda, right, Hanasi, the compiler of the Mishnah, Tana, this is not some, out in left field type of an opinion over here. We're talking about one of the major Tanoim and Gedolim of history, certainly from this period of time. And he writes, right, it's from Mem Shana, from the 40 years after kibbutz galuyos begins, after kibbutz galuyos, that will bring about the first resurrection at that time. He says, right, from that time onward, the period of time will continue, he says, to the last techiyah, the last resurrection of this period of time, hemshech b'tayim v'asher shanim. 210 years, according to Rabbi Yehuda. That would mean 6,000 subtract 210 is 5790. That would be 5770, right? 20 years from now. According to the Zohar, according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to the Leshem, 210 years prior to 6000 begins the period of Techis Amazing. That's 20 years from now. That changes everything, right? Ladas Rabbi Yitzchak. And according to Rabbi Yitzchak, he says, Metayim v'arba asar shanim. He's even more meko, so to speak. He's even more expanded period because we're going backwards in time, right? He says the period of time corresponds to 214 years. That would be 5786. That would mean 16 years from now, right? And he goes on to say, right, that Rav Nachman, he talks about also Gizmon Katsu, but that's the main point over here. That's what the lesson brings down. That according to Rav Yehuda, Techis Amazing begins 210 years in advance of 6000. Rabbi Yitzchak says 214. They're both based upon Psukim. In Parshas Toldos is brought down based on the 40 years. Yitzchak is 40 years old. Zohar picks up on that specific point, right? And it means that all of a sudden we had first we had 230 years left of history. That was the first point, right? It's a lot of time. It means the events of today aren't so significant. And we shortened that because we surmised that the period of Tikkun, the moment of Tikkun, the month of Mashiach, probably comes during the 10th hour of the 6th day of history. 1990, 5750 began that period of time. History certainly turned the corner. We'll look at these events and see how everything changed based upon this, perfectly according to this cheshbon. Not just the internet is not the most significant event of the last 20 years, extremely significant and a telltale sign, but a lot has happened to transform the world completely. If you go back and think, right? Now it turns out that that's 10th hour, exactly. But there is still 63.33 years left. It's a lot of time still. And now all of a sudden we're being told between 16 and 20 years. And the lesson says over here, he comes back and makes the point, says very specifically, he's talking about the Modim, he's still talking about the Techis Amazing, right? And he makes the point, mentions the point that all the holidays will be batal at that time because every day the light of the holidays will actually shine. He goes on to say that he says, Sha'azi hiya yom shukul Shabbos, just like between 6,000 and 7,000, it's Yom Shekulo Shabbos. The 7th millennium corresponds to Shabbos itself. Because likewise, the period of Techis Amazing is Yom Shekulo Yom Tov, right? The Kedusha of Yom Tov is the light of the Techis Amazing. That's why the holidays are no longer operative except for Purim and Yom Kippur. They go on past Techis Amazing, past 6,000. So the lesson says over here, right? He brings that a few pages later on, also still talking about the Techis Amazing. L'chein kol elu shehu Shabbos v'Yom Kippurim v'Purim asher heim remuzim rak al zman asher achar kol yemot Mashiach, right? So Purim and Yom Kippurim and Shabbos will still be functioning in the Techis Amazing because they belong to a period of time after the year 6000. He says after the entire period of Yemot Mashiach, Kulam v'heim b'sod olam haba. They are based upon the light of Olam Haba. He says, "V'orach chai v'nitzchi," the eternal life. Hinehem yiskaimu az adai. They'll still be functioning during the time Yemot Mashiach. Gam kein kedei l'zechot kol yadeihem l'oram l'gilum asid. Right, in order to give people a chance to access that light, even at that period of time. Aval kol modim kulam. But all the holidays during Techis Amazing shehein ramzim rak al oris hatikad Yemot Mashiach. But all the Chagim, Pesach, Shavuos, Sukkot, all these holidays, they only allude their function, the light of the entire period of Yemot Mashiach. Me'achar had chalas man of Techis Amazing, from the beginning of Techis Amazing, ulahala onward, ad sof hasheshes alafim shana. So here the Leshem says very specifically that Techis Amazing, which is the extension of Yemot Mashiach, is up until the year 6000, meaning that the Techis Amazing is part of our history. The transformation takes place in advance of 6000. There's no Mashiach at that time because it's not relevant to have Mashiach at that time. And therefore, the window of opportunity for Mashiach to come based upon this is not a calculation for Mashiach's arrival. We're not saying what date is going to actually come. We're basically taking the statistics, we're taking the facts, information that's existing, that's in the Zohar, that the Leshem is in fact bringing down. We're charting it. We're laying out a timetable, and based upon the information simply stating that according to this, the window of opportunity for Mashiach to come from this point onward, if he isn't already here walking the face of the earth, more than likely probably is, and he just hasn't revealed himself yet, because Moshe Rabbeinu was 80 years old before he finally became the Moshiach of his time, and things replicate themselves from the back then to today as well. A lot of comparisons we'll see coming up. That the events of today are significant. The events of today are extremely significant. And the reason why history is moving so fast, and things are changing so rapidly, and there's so much happening at a very quick rate, all to do with the Jewish people and Eretz Israel, it's all revolving around that, is because we are living in an extremely, extremely unique period of time, unparalleled in the rest of history, a time of tikkun, an opportunity to play a role in the final redemption, and all we have to do is open up our eyes, realize what's happening, and take advantage of the situation.